Right. Good morning, everyone. Shall we start? Just a couple of minutes late, but I believe we're all here who are going to be here. Thank you. So welcome to the County Staffing and Appeals Committee. As you know, the County Council allows filming at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting's taking place? I've just only done that myself. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and will leave via the side doors and use the fire escape next to the kitchen to make our way to the assembly point in the car park at the back. Right, first item, do we have apologies for absence?
I have apologies from Councillor Tierney, and Councillor Goldsack is substituting.
Thank you very much, Councillor Goldsack. And any declarations of interest, that is to say disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I see no hands, so I'll take that as a no. So the 7th of November 2024 minutes, we're being asked to approve the minutes which took place on the 7th of November as a correct record. Can I ask that any member who does not agree with that proposal please to indicate? No indications, so I take that as the minutes are a correct record and that we're approving them. Thank you. So I'll sign the minutes now. Great, thank you very much. So item 3 is public questions. We have no questions. So on to item 4, senior manager pay data and chief officer pay policy statement. So can I ask the head of workforce policy and wellbeing please to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. The paper presented today sets out the Council's obligations under both the Localism Act 2011 and the Local Government Transparency Code of 2015, and it shares the data that we intend to report and publish in order to meet these obligations, subject to full Council approval at the end of this financial year. We are therefore asking the Staffing and Appeals Committee to review and recommend that the transparency data and the chief pay policy statement, and these are provided as appendices 1 and 2 of the paper, be submitted to full Council in March for approval. You'll be familiar from previous years that under the Localism Act, local authorities are required to prepare a chief officer pay policy statement each financial year to be approved by full Council and published by the 31st of March. Separate to this, under the Transparency Code, we're required to publish on the Council's website, in summary, the names of employees paid £150,000 and above, details of all posts within the top 3 tiers of the organisation, including the salary range and ceiling, together with the full-time equivalent salary shown in brackets of £5,000, details of employees earning £50,000 and above, and the organisation's pay multiple, that is the ratio between the highest paid salary and the median salary of the authority's workforce. The senior manager pay data is provided in Appendix 1. It considers the 12-month period from the 1st of December 2023 to the 30th of November 2024. And I will ask Maxine Harriman, the Workforce Policy and Reward Manager, to take you through some of the key highlights.
Thank you. So just focusing first on the second page of Appendix 1. So within the reporting period, there were 33 posts within tiers 1 to 3 of the organisational structure, which is a slight decrease down from 36 posts the previous year. Please note some posts included within these tiers will have changed from the previous year as a result of organisational restructuring. There were 7 post holders in the organisation that were paid on full-time equivalent salaries of £150,000 or more, and these individuals are named within the report in Appendix 1. The remaining posts within tiers 1 to 3, as Anna's highlighted, are shown within their salaries in £5,000 brackets using the full-time equivalent salaries. There were 406 employees with total earnings of £50,000 or above, which you can find in pages 3 to 12 of Appendix 1. Just worth stressing that when we talk about earnings, this data considers employees' total remuneration during the 12-month reporting period. Therefore, it takes account of individuals' basic salary plus any additional elements of pay that they may have received. For example, overtime, market supplements, allowances, or other contractual payments. This is an increase of 146 employees compared to the previous year, in which there were 260. It's important to note, however, that the £50,000 threshold for reporting has remained static since its introduction in 2015. However, over the past 10 years, the cost of living awards have continued to be applied by the Council to both the national and local pay scales. This is of particular significance as it means that more of our pay points on our professional and management pay scale are paid above £50,000 per annum and therefore now subject to reporting. As an example, it now includes all points over grade P3.10, whereas previously it would have incorporated points P3.10 and above. This represents an additional 61 employees this year being included in the pay data report. Unless there's an increase in the £50,000 threshold, these numbers will inevitably increase year on year due to the cost of living increases being applied to those pay scales. You'll notice from the data that the full-time equivalent salaries in some cases falls above or below the salary bandings for the role, and there are 157 cases where this occurs. Where earnings are above the salary banding, this is due to the post holder having received additional payments such as overtime or allowances for designated statutory responsibilities. And in the majority of cases, these are legitimate payments which form part of an individual's employment contract and terms and conditions. There are, however, 29 people within this group of 157 who have received total remuneration above their salary bandings due to other factors. This may be working significant additional hours, including call-out or emergency duties, which may have attracted enhanced rates of pay, as well as those who have more than one role or additional relief roles alongside their main role. The majority of these are undertaking roles in social care, and is an increase of 3 people from 26 last year. And so we're liaising with the executive directors to look into these cases further. Where earnings fall below the range, this may be because the post holder commenced in post partway through the year or is contracted to work less than 1 FTE. In some cases, it's also due to the salary bandings representing the pay values from the 1st of April 2024, following the implementation of the pay award. As the pay award was not agreed until later in the year, the new values may not have been paid until the reporting period had closed. A good example of this was the recent pay award not being applied to the leadership pay scale until December 2024, and the reporting period for this report closed on the 30th of November. In terms of the mean and median salaries that we're required to publish, the current mean salary for the organisation this year is £35,700, which is an increase of £2,161 from last year. This figure is influenced by the cost of living increases that were effective from the 1st of April. The median salary of the organisation is £32,654, which is an increase of £1,290, which again reflects the cost of living award. The pay ratio compares the chief executive's salary and the organisation's median salary in the reporting period. In the reporting period, the pay ratio was 1.6.1 compared to a ratio in the previous year of 1.6.8. Our pay ratio is broadly the same as last year and is slightly below Hertfordshire County Council's pay ratio as a neighbouring comparator. Other local authorities' ratios are included within the report for comparison. We are aware that other authorities are reporting on a financial year basis, so these comparator ratios applied as of the 31st of March 2024. We're looking at bringing our reporting in line with the financial year as of 2026, and as part of this, we'll review the way in which we report remuneration of £50,000 and above to ensure we're balancing transparency alongside what's required to be published. And finally, the Chief Officer Pay Policy Statement can be found in Appendix 2 and sets out the Council's policy and practice in relation to all statutory and non-statutory Chief Officers as defined under our Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a really rich picture. Are there any questions or comments? Neil?
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned the threshold. Who can change that? I mean, presumably the threshold was set for a particular reason, but as salaries rise, surely the threshold should rise, maybe? I don't know.
I think the Chief Executive would like to say something.
Thank you, Chair. Anna's answer to Councillor Shaler's absolutely correct. The Transparency Code requirements are set by government, particularly the Ministry for Housing, MHCLG, Ministry for Communities, Housing and Local Government. Too many abbreviations, too many different names within a short space for the same department. The fact this was set in 2015 under the then Secretary of State Eric Pickles and has not subsequently been revisited is interesting, because this is equally the case with other thresholds. So the £50,000 threshold that Anna and Maxine have quoted hasn't been adjusted since 2015. None of the other thresholds have been adjusted since 2015. So, for example, whilst we start to talk about publishing pay-related data for individuals earning £150,000 pro rata per year and naming them, that's seen no elevation in line with cost of living either. So actually more and more people are being named individually and personally as a consequence of the thresholds not having moved in line with general inflation or even with sectoral pay inflation, which would have been relatively easy to track. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me if I've got a few questions. They may come out to be of understanding, and I'll be very happy if you can come back to me after today if you haven't got the answers here. But going through this very comprehensive report, for which I thank you, you've part answered why there's significantly higher earnings than the maximum level, involved. But I know in certain clutches there are roles that are obvious. So on page 19 of the pack, I think that's page 3 of your document, but on page 19 of our agenda pack, the first 4 place and sustainability entries are pushing up towards double earnings to what the lower end of the salary band was. Now, 3 of those were local highways officers. My 2 comments on that are, knowing some of the information around the local highways officers and what they've had to do, I guess I'm not surprised at it, but as a standalone figure, it doesn't tell us the whole story. What we really need is an analysis of what have we saved in non-appointments and saved in not necessarily saved, but what does it cost us for people being on long-term absence and long-term, well, I'll leave it at long-term absence for various reasons, because it's leading to a significant overspend, and if I'm honest with you, that's less potholes. That's where I'm coming from. So the costs are compounding there. I've got the same question on SEND specialists, educational psychologists. Can't read it now. Psychologists. There's significantly higher earnings there. And I've got one other question, which is when you said that the median increase or our average salary had gone up, I calculated that had gone up at 6.44%. Was that in line with expectations? Was that in line with what we said that we were going to pay? Because that seems a little bit higher than my memory. So I'd like some analysis on that as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think the first couple of those, one you asked about highways officers. Now, we will come back to you with detailed information, I believe that there is a local agreement in place for that group of colleagues to cover, for example, when they need to go out and work for emergency call out.
Sorry, let me explain. I have no doubt that they are working hard and doing extra time, and I know that some of them are doing 70, 80 hours a week. I know they are because they've had to. My question is, what's the analysis? Why are they having to do that, and what's being done to not do that? I know we're only looking at figures here, but for instance, if we've got a couple of vacancies there we've not filled and they're filling for that, I would guess that the actual cost to the council of getting that work done through overtime is pretty negligibly the same as if we'd have had the resources. However, if we're doubling up on overtime because we've got people on long-term sickness or long-term disciplinary issues or something like that, then that's a double cost to the council. And I'd like to understand more about that. So does that clarify it a little bit easier?
It does. And I think if that's okay, I'll speak to the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability and we'll come back with detail on those specifically to you.
Come back to this committee. Yeah, thank you.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful because there is a sort of difference between, certain groups of staff are going to have extra payments built in because they have overtime and they, are on call at night and things like that. And that's different from vacancies or people who are employed on sort of long-term sick or long-term absence, which then creates extra demand for the work and so on. That is quite different. So it'd be really helpful. Do you want to say something?
Thanks, Chair. Well, I'd like to thank the officers for this report. Well, excellent. And these reports are a bit strange in that they were originated really just to make a party political point, and they're sort of used as the basis of press releases about how terrible it is that council officers earn so much, which is a shame. And I think there's ways that we shouldn't use this report. I thought Councillor Goldsack made a good point in that we would want to catch it if we're finding that we're finding it difficult to recruit people at the right level in the councils, and we're spending much more on then outsourcing it or getting relief staff in through an agency or anything like that. I think I'd want to caution about what he was saying about long-term absences, like just sick and whatever. And I mean, there's a danger as well that we could start talking about individuals that we shouldn't. And in particular, I mean, if you say you've got the situation where one of our highways officers was run over and he's there in jail in hospital with his broken leg, possibly the person who ran him over was in jail. It would be dreadful if we were sort of hassling that and trying to interfere in arrangements which are surely to do with the arrangements we've negotiated with relevant trade unions about how we treat people decently who have a misfortune like this. And, somebody could be on sick leave if they were in a traffic accident doing their duties as a highway officer. And I think it's quite right that we should not be looking at that as a waste or a something that we should address, but that we should be looking forward to them coming back and resuming their duties. And the other thing I'd like to say is it is a political thing, this. I mean, it's clearly causing a lot of bureaucracy to have to look at local highways officers and senior nurses or anything like this, as coming within this report. I think that threshold should be raised, but we're looking in the wrong place as well, because if we want to see where high pay should be tackled, if you like, and where we should be worried about the amount of money that's going through this council into people's pockets, it's not actually with our directly employed staff, but we should contrast it with the people who run services for us. So, for instance, a lot of what we spend in adults and health goes through to care homes, to other companies. Now, if you look at the directors of the people who are working for us there, they would be off the scale on one of these charts. And I don't think any of our, even most senior council officers, for instance, has a yacht that compares to the sort of Arabian royalties yachts in Marbella. But there are people who are running care homes for us who do have that sort of money. And so in some ways, I think we're looking at the wrong place. But thanks very much for the report. It's excellent.
Was that a
Yes.
signal?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Although I'm sorry, I'm being a bit disorganized about what I wanted to say. I thank you also for the report. I think it's a really excellent report, and it was very well presented. Thank you. I think it's one of the things about this report, as Mike has pointed out, is that it was designed with a particular purpose in mind, a particular political purpose in mind. Interestingly, it also does a lot of other stuff that I think we should be paying just as much attention to. And an awful lot of the attention in this report has always been focused on people on higher wages, which was what the kind of political background to it was. One of the things that I find most interesting in this report is that our median salary is £32,000. And that actually, given the rises in the cost of living that have been going on, is not a high salary these days. And I think it's well worth drawing attention to the fact that actually, as an organisation, an enormous number of our employees are not on high wages. And we expect a lot of them, and the public expect a lot of them. They work incredibly hard. Sometimes, I mean, thinking about the people who drive our gritting trucks, when you were talking about members of staff who are sometimes on getting higher wages than their salary band would imply, I'm sure a number of those people are people who are out driving gritting trucks in the winter. And I think it's really important that we recognise that that this is an organisation that fundamentally depends on a very large number of not very well paid staff who work very, very long hours, sometimes in all weathers, sometimes all through the night, dealing with emergencies. And this report does flag that to a certain extent because of so much of the focus is on the people who are getting the higher salaries, whereas actually the work of this council and what we and the work that we depend on as a community in Cambridgeshire is often done by the people on the lower salaries who are the substantial number of our workforce. So just wanted to say that and thank them and you for the report.
Thank you. Janet.
Yes, I would first of all just like to say I really welcome the engagement and the discussion and these sorts of topics, and we were hoping to move the committee to more sort of discussion around the workforce issues. So that's really, really helpful. What I was going to suggest we do is perhaps at the next committee in June, we'll have a routine workforce profile update, and perhaps we could incorporate some of this sort of information in there to give you a better sense of which are the roles that are attracting overtime and why are they doing that whether it be routine or in a case where they're required to do it to sort of fill gaps. But we can perhaps provide some more insights into that, which might just give a bit more richness to the discussion. Thanks.
Can I say, I think that's a really helpful suggestion, because we're obviously not out to look at individual cases, but there are potentially very important inferences that we can draw at a sort of strategic level. For example, if some roles are difficult to recruit to, or, you know, just the extent to which our workforce is, you know, who are not necessarily very highly paid, are expected to do really, really difficult jobs. You know, the demands on them and their personal time, you know, being on call through the night, that kind of thing, is it can be very demanding. So I really endorse that suggestion, because it's not about the individuals. It's what does the data, what can the data tell us that is significant at a strategic level? What are the signs that we should be reading from this data that can help us fix problems and make things better for our workforce? I just had a couple of questions, really. One was in terms of our median salary, how does 32.6k compare to the national median salary? I just don't know. And the second point is 50k in absolute terms at a certain point in 2015, 10, whatever. Whenever the initial 15, you know, there'll be a correct answer for what in real terms would that be today. And you know, that sort of fact would help us, I think, interrogate this data in a kind of, at least in the accurate sense that it was originally intended. Because it's, as years go by, the original sort of political implication just gets sort of more and more distorted, I think, as the sort of real terms effect of this sort of goes by. Anyway, sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I never had the chance to come back earlier, Chair. So I asked a question about 6.44% increase on the medium wage, and I didn't get enough response to that. And there are a couple of other points. I'm not going to go down the political route. I didn't come to this as a political route. I came to this to understand the operational impact of what the figures present in front of us. But at the bottom of page 33, this is an information request, if I can. And I'm happy again to have it outside the meeting. We've got 7 independent chairs to which we're all paying in excess of £50,000. Welcome knowledge of what those 7 independent chairs are. That's the kind of operational information I was trying to get, not score political points. And if you look at the towards the top of page 34, there is a manager sensory support team 0 to 25 years. And I think the pay scale may be wrong. It's 49,000 to 138,000. That seemed a little bit out of kilter, so I thought I'd share that. But the 6.44% increase as a gap, as a what we were expecting. That was my question. Is it in line with what we were expecting?
So I have Janet and Stephen who I think will respond.
So on the 6.9%, what I was going to try and explain was with the so the National Joint Council Pay Award that was agreed for last year, which was the 1,290 up to salaries of there or thereabouts 40,000, I think, and then 2.5% thereafter. If you look at what that £1,290 represents in terms of an increase for those on the lowest paid, it was around about, I think, 10%. And then that percentage decreases the higher the salaries go, closer to the 40,000, where it tips into 2.5. So if you look at it in the round, then yes, we would expect it to be significantly above the 2.5% because so many of our colleagues are in those lower pay scales.
Thank you.
That's not very forensic explanation, but we could give you more detail to support that. Thanks.
Chair, just in response to Councillor Goldsack's question on the independent chairs. Independent chairs are part of our Children Education and Families Directorate. They work alongside the safeguarding boards and are responsible for chairing statutory child and care reviews, and that includes fulfilling the role of independent reviewing officer for child protection case conferences. So that's a very specific role that we have. That's why we have a number of them. They're all predominantly part-time as well, rather than full-time employees of the council. They sit within our quality assurance and practice improvement service in children. Thank you.
Thank you. There's been a lot of questions and comments about the transparency data. Is there anything about the Chief Officer pay policy statement particularly? Neil.
Yeah, I don't want to be too political about this either, but it's certainly we have massive amounts of money going into our privatized monopolies that keep digging up our roads, for instance. But I think we should be interested in the job satisfaction of our particular workforce. But my question is a little bit on the side. Having seen how much it cost in people as well as salaries and money to do the last divorce with Peterborough, this is the best committee to look at what it will cost making unitaries and dividing up our various parts. And I wonder if at some point people could put some estimates on the kind of human and salary costs that will be involved in some of those scenarios. Thank you.
Stephen, would you like to answer that?
Thank you, Chair. You guessed correctly that that one was heading for me. I actually would suggest, Councillor Shaler, that any overview of transition costs for local government reorganisation would fall more directly to the Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee as our, if I can use the phrase, committee of committees. And then ultimately, of course, to full council as well, because full council itself will have to take some decisions in regard to local government reorganisation, but the potential implications on workforce costs would be more financial in the first instance, which is why strategy, resources and performance would be the right place in the first instance for that to be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unless there's anything further, are we all happy to recommend this to go to full council? Yep. Thank you very much indeed. Can I ask, can we move to the item 5 then, pay gap reporting, another rich seam of data. Can I ask the EDI business partner to introduce the report, please? Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. The pay gap papers includes a detailed report and analysis of the 2024 gender and ethnicity pay gap data in Appendix 1 and a summary publication in Appendix 2. Staffing and Appeals Committee members are asked to note the contents of the report to consider approval to full council in March. Gender pay gap reporting is a statutory report requirement for us, and we have chosen to report on our ethnicity pay gap to identify disparities in the average pay between ethnic groups. As the data note sets out, this year, improved reporting, enhanced analytical capacity and data quality checks by the PI team, alongside improved data quality, has resulted in a more robust approach to defining the gender pay gap cohort. Our gender pay gap data for 2024 reveals a mean pay gap of 10.46%, sorry, a bit of a cold, and a median pay gap of 10.80%. If we compare this data to last year's figures, there's been a slight increase in both the mean and the median. These figures are mainly driven by the makeup of the workforce at different pay scales. Whilst our workforce is predominantly female, which you'll see, representation of female roles in professional and managerial and leadership scales is disproportionate to the overall gender split of the workforce. Appendix 1 also provides an insight into the pay gap by directorate. Our ethnicity pay gap has decreased to 1% from 5.6%, and the median is 0% compared to 5.8% in 2023. Between 2023 and 2024, the distribution of minority ethnic employees across income quartiles showed a positive shift. We recognise that currently around 29.32% of colleagues have not disclosed their ethnicity, and therefore more accurate disclosure figures would enable more accurate reporting in the future. This is something we will continue to work on this year. The final section of both reports outline the actions taken since the last pay gap publication to support narrowing the pay gaps and upcoming actions. All actions are linked to our people strategy and EDI strategy action plans. Actions to draw your attention to include funding an initial cohort of the Women of Colour in Leadership programme, expanding the ILM Level 5 coaching and mentoring cohort to increase the number of coaching sessions available to colleagues, evaluating the pilot mutual mentoring programme to relaunch in 2025, and launching essential learning for all managers on having effective our conversations. Thank you. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you very much indeed. It's an excellent report and very well presented. I absolutely feel your pain about the cold. Well done. No, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Neil.
Just a very short one, Chair, about the 29.32% of unknown ethnicity. Do you have any idea why this is so stubbornly high? Things like you don't have a box to tick, or is there anything that we can do about that?
Thank you. it's a mixture. So one of the things is around trust for the organisation, and we're trying to work on that with colleagues to inform them what the data is used for, how it's stored, confidentiality, etc. We have seen a slight increase following January ratings conversation. So colleagues were asked to go on and update and review their data and check it was there. So we have seen an increase in the last month or so. But it's something that we're still trying to understand with colleagues and ensure that we're putting in appropriate measures to provide confidence, I think, in that the information is safe, stored confidentiality, things like that.
Can I come back slightly? This is kind of what I was coming at from the side. So this may also give us an indicator about how comfortable people feel within the organization. So these are interesting data points, and it might require us to do some more self-analysis, if you like. Thank you.
Janet.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to touch on that as well, to say that we've been talking about this, and we have been racking our brains about how to more proactively get this information. And what we're not really getting underneath is how many people are nervous or uncomfortable with sharing the information, and how many people simply haven't gone in and done it, because it literally only takes a couple of minutes, but people don't always appreciate that. So one of the things that we're going to look at is how we can more robustly require people to actually go in. If they then go in and choose the box that says prefer not to say, that's absolutely fine. At least we'll then have a full data set. It might not be the full data that we would like to see, but we will know that people have done it. So we are actively working on those sorts of things this year, as Faye says, so that we can just make sure that we are as accurate with our data, and therefore the actions that we propose to take as we can be. Thanks.
Thank you. Henry.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just looking at the comparison tables between ourselves and other county councils on page 54, where it compares our mean and median gender pay gaps. See, I know our here at this county council, ours is sort of weighted in favour of males. Do we know what that, the weighting is for the other local authorities? If it's weighted more, who comes out on top essentially?
Do you mean in terms of the pay gap figures?
No, so which gender has the higher amount?
Oh, in terms of the makeup of the workforce? Yeah. We haven't got that in here. That's something we can definitely look at and include.
Okay. Yeah, it'd just be interesting to see if there's a pattern.
Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks very much for the report. Lovely job. I'd like to ask a quick technical question first. On the gender reporting, I mean, one of the reasons that can lead to a gender pay gap is when women are more concentrated in part-time occupations. And I was just wondering, I'm not sure if I understood the report right, but are the final figures that we've got on the gender pay gap sort of excluding that effect? They're looking at fixed full-time, and have sort of taken away the effect of part-time. Otherwise on that, I'd like to say, I mean, it's good to see that I think we're ahead of the curve, because the government is bringing in legislation which will make councils have action plans about their gender pay gap, and they are also bringing in legislation that will make councils that are not already doing it look at the ethnicity pay gap. And that's a good thing. We're ahead of the game now, and we've got stuff that we can point to. And we've got to do something about trying to push up that percentage of people who are reporting, and there might, who knows what's hidden in that as to, that might change the percentages. But on the face of it, on the ethnicity pay gap, we've got some good news there, that we've gone from a pay gap of, 5.8% for the median pay down to 0%, which would, and I hope that does reflect the reality, because it is, if it is, we should say that's good news. And of course, I've been pushing on this committee that we should monitor the disability pay gap. And of course, we can look forward to the disability pay gap being monitored in the future, because there is government legislation coming forward to do that. I'm a little bit disappointed that we're not already setting the baseline here and now on that. And of course, I recognise you're probably doing a good deal of work to try and get the data in so that people report to us regarding their disabilities, because to make that work, we need people to report what they're doing so that we can be helpful, and hopefully we can get it out there that it's a good idea to fill in the forms to bring that up to date, and then we will be hitting the ground running. And we can look at it saying, well, the government legislation might not be in until 2026 or later, and getting us to start then. But this is a good thing to do. We should be starting now. We should be looking to see that we're a council that's leading rather than following, and that we'll be able to say, well, we're well ahead of this, and we've got a grasp of what's going on here, and we've got ideas of what we're going to do about it. So I'm looking forward for this council to be seen as a progressive council that is actually has thought about the disability pay gap and has thought about ways of tackling it even before anybody in government is telling us that we must do. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And Janet, would you like to comment on that before then we
Yeah,
come to Lucy?
Just very briefly, I mean, I would completely agree that we wouldn't necessarily sit back until we're mandated to do something, in the same way we got ahead of it with the ethnicity pay gap, and we're keen to publish that ahead of being asked to do so. I think, as you've alluded to, Councillor Black, the key is about having sufficient data to make it a worthwhile process to do, and for the data to be meaningful, because it is a significant piece of work to do it. It's weeks of work to crunch the numbers and analyse it. So we want to make sure we're at a level where that data will tell us something that we can meaningfully act on then. So hence the reason for us doing more pushing, but we'll update at next committee. Hopefully we'll be in a better position by then. Thanks.
Thank you. Lucy.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure whether, I think it's quite interesting thinking about this report in relation to the report we've just had. And I would be very curious to know, I'm aware from the report we've just had that, and I would be aware anyway, because I know this perfectly well, that our very, very senior leadership team is somewhat male dominated now. That was not the case 4 years ago. I make no apology for it, because I think it's really important that we appoint the right people for the jobs, and we have done that. But I am curious to know what would happen if you took that, the absolute, I mean, I think we've got 6 people in that category. If you took those 6 people out, what that would do to the numbers, because I think it's not necessarily helpful to be having a report which can be swung by a very tiny number of people at the top. So I don't imagine you've got that data now. If you have, I'd be interested. But if you haven't, maybe you could send it sometime, because I'm sure it's the kind of thing it would be quite easy for you to work out. But I'm not expecting you to do it in the meeting, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Yes, it is somewhere in this report. I'm just trying to do a quick search, but I'll make sure we've got that. Thank you.
If it's there, I'll look harder. Thank you.
Chair, thank you, and agree with the leader's comments. Whilst on pure pay terms, as this report obviously sets out, a higher proportion of men occupy our highest paid roles in the county council. If I look at the gender composition of the corporate leadership team as a whole, we have 5 men and 4 women on the corporate leadership team, because the corporate leadership team does include some of the other officers that are not executive directors, like the Service Director HR, Service Director Legal and Governance, and of course our recently appointed Director of Public Health. So the gender balance is almost 50-50, but I absolutely agree with the factual point around senior salaries and more men than women in those roles at present.
Thank you. That's helpful
Thank
information
you,
as well.
Mark.
Yeah, just a straightforward statement, really. I think the last report and this report are quite brilliant statistical analysis of where we're at. Can't argue with that. I think they are. If there's a couple of errors or things, I think the key to these reports, and this was where I was going to with my questions on the previous paper, the key to this report is what operational and leadership management are going to do with the information that it comes. And I think that would be of interest. So hence my questioning, so if we look at place and sustainability, as a result of you can see that, this is what I'm thinking. We've got some people earning twice their money. That's a compliment to them for the ability to work that long and that hard. But what does that mean for their well-being? How's it do? How are we doing for recruitment? These are the questions that if I was an operational line manager, I would be thinking about. And this second report is exactly that. You know, councils down the years, and I'm not just saying this administration, I'm talking down the years, have produced an archive full of great reports. Right, it's what we do with them. It's it's the analysis that comes, particularly with statistical reports. So I think that actually what might be a future exercise for this committee would be the analysis of these reports by the line heads. You know, so the senior leadership team per functionality looks at these reports and actually gives us, we're not talking about war and peace here, we're talking about a little missive that comes back and says, as a result of looking at this, we're going to look at this and this, because that shows me that we are not producing reports. And I share Councillor Black, and I think it was Councillor Shaler's point of view, the 50,000 limits is ridiculous. That needs change, you know, and it's creating a report for the sake of report. I've got no issue with that whatsoever. But I think in this case, it's really about, so what are we going to do with this report? We've all said it's a great report. Well done, officers, sit it on the shelf. No, let's have some analysis of it and learnings from it and see what we can do better. That's where I'm coming from.
Thank you. I think that's really important. Do you want to comment?
So, Chair, very briefly, just to say, I absolutely agree with Councillor Goldsack's comments. In saying that, I do want to clarify, however, that the reports are not optional. So we have a formal statutory requirement to report against the Transparency Code for local government and produce a published and public chief officer pay policy statement, both of which were contained in the previous report. And the gender pay gap reporting is an equally statutory requirement that we are expected to fulfil. So irrespective of what we might deem the value of the reporting, not doubting the quality of what we've got, the value and whether or not that drives action is probably a more interesting conversation for this committee to have going forward. I would, however, say that some of the burden that these types of reports create on teams that are increasingly squeezed is also problematic for local government and other parts of the public sector. So I would, picking up some of the comments from members, I would encourage government to revisit some of these requirements. If it gives members any comfort, when I used to be the National HR Director for the NHS in England, I used to be required to provide a whole range of returns to the Cabinet Office as the centre of government. For 6 months, I decided to stop sending those reports to see what would happen. Nothing did. So it would rather question the value of some of the reports. These, however, are for public accountability and transparency, so there is benefit in doing them. But I absolutely accept that what we want to do is look at what actions can we take as a response to these and what does the data tell us that we should then be doing. What Faye has helpfully done in her introduction today of this particular report has highlighted some of the things we are doing, such as the Women of Colour into Leadership programmes and other efforts that are being undertaken to try and encourage more women to progress into more senior roles in the organisation. But I do think on both reports we can probably think further about how do they drive action, not just produce information. Thank you.
Janet.
Stephen just more or less took the words out of my mouth on the latter part, really, but it was just to reassure you that certainly around the gender pay gap report or the pay gap reporting, not just gender, on the ethnicity pay gap, there is an action plan that we do attribute to that, and we make sure that everything that we capture in that goes into either our EDI action plan or our people strategy action plan, so it's captured and we're doing something. So I completely agree, but I think the question about pay transparency one has really given me some good food for thought, and yeah, we don't necessarily follow up on that in the same way or look at it service by service, so we will pick that up. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I have found the answer to my question. It's at the bottom of page 10 of the report, and what it says is that actually, if we took out those particular roles, it would be 8% instead of 10, which brings us much more in line with most other councils, and I think is it's useful that that's there. But it doesn't mean that we should be ignoring the need to bring on other people within our organisation. Thank you.
Thank you. And operationalizing this information is the only point of having the information. So it is essential to do that. And I think, in the past we have discussed focusing on those points, or at least some of those points, and maybe looking at case studies for sort of what, you know, for example, it seems that, you know, and it's typical that women are much less pushy when it comes to taking up new posts. They do just accept the offer that they're made, and men will tend to come back and challenge and want a higher starting salary. So, you know, if that is a behavioural procedural thing that we want to look at, we could, in this committee, we could look at some specific examples, not about individuals, but about processes and culture change, about how that could change, because it is a knotty problem. Otherwise, we would have solved it already. So it's sort of being able to look at what we're doing about these things, because equal pay, you know, I mean, I grew up at a time, it probably sounds like ancient history, but I grew up at a time, some people in this room have as well, where jobs were advertised at different salaries for men and women. And although that became outlawed, it's still literally the fact that women get paid differently from men. And that's before you get into other areas of discrimination. And it just has to stop. So we can, you know, we must try harder, and I think that's not looking at everything at once, but picking some specific areas, and let's understand what is happening in those areas, because that's us doing our oversight bit. So if that's acceptable, I think that would be a really good way ahead. I'm not hearing any dissent from that. This is to be approved to go to full council in March. Is everyone happy with that? Thank you very much, and thank you again for such a great report. So let's go to item 6, the report on employment policy and development legislative changes, of which there are now a number.
Oh, indeed. Thank you. So this report, the purpose of this report really was to set out what those proposed legislative changes that are contained in the Employment Rights Bill that was issued in October last year. Quite extensive changes, as you'll see from set out throughout the report. Some of those changes are already under consultation. Some started at back end of 2024. We're not expecting any of the reforms to actually take effect until 2026, but of course we don't know that for sure yet. And we haven't seen the outcome of any of those consultations just yet. So what we did agree to do and have duly done, which is contained in the report, is have a look at those areas one by one to see what our current policy is in relation to the proposed changes that may take effect, and what we would need to do to bring ourselves in line with those should they actually be enacted into law. So the paper then provides a summary of each of those anticipated legislative changes, what the bill says, what that would mean for Cambridgeshire. There are a number of areas, as you will see. I would say that there is nothing in there that causes us any concern at all. In most cases, we are broadly in line with what's being proposed. There may need to be some small tweaks to our policy to bring things into line, but nothing that causes us any cause for concern or alarm at this stage. I don't know if anybody has any questions on that particular aspect of it. Any
Questions?
Then I'll move on to the policy.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for the report. It's good to read this and read about sort of positive developments. And I'm looking at it, and certainly as a county council, you would hope that we were a reputable authority, and that most of these things would be things that we would be doing anyway through choice. And of course, that is what we're reading about quite a lot of these things. I mentioned briefly that clearly as a county council, this legislation is going to impact us, and the main way it's going to impact us is with things that are outsourced, other people working for us, and a lot of those businesses are going to have to change their ways because of the policies that are coming forward. And again, I suppose from our point of view, looking at it, for instance, the Equality, Race and Disability Bill says that it's got stuff to ensuring that outsourcing of services can no longer be used by employers to avoid paying equal pay. So that's going to be relevant. I mean, looking through some of the things, I think we do the things that it's asking us on redundancy consultation. I do think that as a councillor, I sometimes wish that I heard about the possibility that there might be redundancies anywhere a bit more swiftly and with it being flagged up a little bit more. With 0 hours contracts, it would appear this really only applies to our relief staff. And I think we've got to look at that carefully to make sure that we are doing things right. And again, through a lot of what we do, I think we need an objective of making sure that we're using our own staff and that we're not using expensive agency staff or consultancy staff, you know, wherever we can do that. Now, the government plan of legislation does talking about bringing in a new right of access for trade unions with transparent framework and clear rules designed in consultation with unions and businesses for union officials to meet, represent, recruit and organise members. And I think we've got work to do on that. Specifically, there is definitely going to be a new duty to inform workers of their right to join a trade union, both in their written statement at the beginning of their employment and at regular points during employment. And this is a good thing. I mean, I think we should adopt this as soon as we possibly can. And, you know, we could do a regular statement now, and I think we should consult with our recognised trade unions and think about getting a statement out as soon as possible, and also making sure that we have something in our documentation for our recruits, because trade unions are good for employers. They save money a lot of the time. You know, if you don't have good relations with your trade unions and constant negotiation, it leads to employment tribunals, which are expensive, and it leads to managers making mistakes which could easily be pointed out in consultation. And often trade unions can talk to an employee, and before things have got to a dire state, they can say to somebody, you can't behave like this, you know. And again, as I've been a trade union official or representative, rather, layer representative for a long time, and frequently you would talk to a member who thinks that they are having their first reprimand or whatever, and you dig into it a bit and you say, you are actually in last chance saloon, and you have got to not do this particular thing that you're doing, because if you do that, we're going to be into all sorts of legal businesses, and the employer might be wrong, but it's going to be an awful lot of hassle for you and them. Whereas if you stop doing this particular thing, we can draw back from that. So yeah, trade unions are good for employers, and yeah, a lot of things in the legislation that's good. Things like we're going to have to get used to an employer that there won't be age discriminatory rates for minimum wages, for instance. And so that we're going to have to make sure that we're paying everybody the same there. And of course, I imagine that's going to be coming in fairly soon. So it's good to be reporting, though, on legislative changes that are for the better, and that we hope will improve our relations with our employers and the efficiency that comes from that. Thanks.
Thanks. Lucy. Oh, Janet, would you like to respond?
Thank you. I think it's important to say that we do absolutely value the relationships that we've got with our recognised trade unions, and welcome the discussions that we have and the challenge that those colleagues provide to us on a regular basis. And we do have very constructive working relationships, I would say, that are centred around our negotiation framework and our corporate joint panel meeting, which we meet monthly. So all the other part of this report sets out the policy development that we've undertaken throughout the year, and there's some, I think, some really good improvements in the policies that we have had that have been reflected in this report, and actually all of those will have been discussed with the trade unions, and we've had their input throughout in doing so. So I think we also make sure that we publish information around the trade unions that we recognise on CamWeb and how people can access those. So as that piece of legislation, like all the others, evolves, if there are requirements for us to do things that we aren't quite doing yet, we will pick those up. I think the only thing that is potentially significant in that is we don't have that information contained within our statement of terms and conditions at the moment, but that's not a difficult thing for us to add in. That's additional information we can do. And I take Councillor Buck's point. There's no reason why we would wait on that. We can easily pick that up. Thanks.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. My point is an entirely different one. So just looking at, and it's sort of slightly tangential to these, to the changes, but only slightly. There are some changes here to maternity and family leave and paternity leave, parental leave, all of those. Just thinking about us as an employer and also as an organisation for whom fostering and adoption is incredibly important. I wonder whether there is the need to review these is also an appropriate time to review the support that we are offering staff who are considering adoption or fostering, because obviously it's a really, I mean, those things are critical to us as an organisation, and the more that we can support our staff who might be, sorry, the other bit of that is kinship care. So just reviewing the way in which we support staff to be able to provide those kinds of really, really valuable support to children who need that support would be, it might be a timely time to look at that. That's all. I've expressed that very badly. I hope you get
No, not at all. I think it's a really valid point. So we have captured, and we can share the information that we have around adoption leave and how we support people who are, as you say, fulfilling those really important services to the children within our care, but also, you know, something that people obviously feel very particularly strongly about themselves. So we have covered that, and we have extended our paternity leave this year as contained in the report, and introduced kinship leave. But I think you make a very good point in that whenever we look at anything aligned to these policies, we should make sure we're reviewing whether our arrangements around kinship and adoption leave are also in line. So yes, we'll just make a note to do that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments about this area? Councillor Shaler.
Thank you very much. Just a clarification. I'm sure this is just the way I'm reading it. On 0 hours contract, it says workers who have 0 or low guaranteed hours would have the right to move to a contract. But in the what it means for the CCC, it looks like we're already doing that. And I also want to applaud the fact that it looks like we're ahead of the curve on most of this. In fact, it's great to see that it is that. So are we actually doing that already for 0 hours contract?
Yes, indeed. And so we have, our approach to this is, as you rightly say, is about relief contracts. So whereas with 0 hours contracts, in a lot of cases, the way employers use those is that people are obviously don't have any contractual hours, but can be asked to work. And if they don't agree to take the work, then that arrangement can be ended. Ours is very much around, it's no mutuality of obligation. So we will offer shifts to people, but they're not required to take them. And what we found is that a lot of people want those flexible arrangements for a variety of different reasons. It works for them. And actually a lot of the relief contracts that people hold are second contracts. So particularly in our social care settings, we might have people working in one residential service, holding a permanent contract of employment with a certain number of hours, and then they hold a relief contract for a different type of role or a different service as well. So I would say, yes, we are definitely have been ahead of that for a long time, and have made sure that we regularly ask managers to regularly review where people are working regular hours, and in some cases quite a lot of hours. We ask managers to remind them that if they wish to have a permanent contract of employment with contractual hours, where we have vacancies, we'll slot them into those.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. Have we got any other comments or questions about that item? In which case, can we note the summary of changes and the council's current level of compliance and assessment of changes required? Yes, thank you very much indeed. And we now move to the Staffing and Appeals Committee agenda plan. Are there any comments or notes about that? Mark.
In the light of, I think, acceptance of the request for analysis of the pay gap and previous report by senior management, wouldn't it be pertinent to see those added at some point to come back to this committee? Thank you.
And it's the general point, isn't it, of sort of operationalizing, sort of demonstrating to us that key ideas or problems are being.
I'm proposing that we get the answer to when now, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying let's make sure that we don't lose that and that it does appear on a future agenda.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point, and I'm sure that other points that have been raised will be incorporated into the action plan. If we can assume that those points are that we've discussed are going to be made, can we note the plan? Thank you very much. The next item is proposed to exclude the press and public, to resolve that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the agenda contains exempt information from the Local Government Act as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed. This information relates to individuals or financial or business affairs of particular people. Do I have a seconder? Lucy, thank you very much. Can I ask that any member who does not agree with this raise the hand or object? No, thank you very much. So that's carried, and we will move into confidential session. And we need to just a few minutes to ensure that the link really is broken.